This is the DRS train.
Right now in Formula One, at the team that are the multiple-time reigning champions, they have a generational talent in one seat and a list of very esteemed drivers who look like amateurs when they merely try and go against them. Not just that, but they've got two senior figures who seem to be at each other's throats. One of them can't go 5 seconds without causing a storm in the media, and the other one can't go 5 minutes without destroying his WhatsApp notifications. So, that begs the question, what exactly is going on at Red Bull in 2025 and what has brought us to this situation? I'm Nedzo, and I'm joined by Ace Shield and Karen Smith, and that's exactly the question we'll be aiming to discuss today, talk about all the different ways that we've come to this situation where the team that at one point were winning 20 races in a season, they're now struggling to they're now not at the top, and they're struggling to keep water essentially. So I'll throw this over to Kyron first. What are your initial thoughts on why Red Bull have gone down this current cliff?
Look, Nedzo, good to be with you. Same with Ace. It's a full-blown civil war at Red Bull right now, and as you touched on in the intro, there's political chaos, there's mismanagement, ego clashes, there's systemic dysfunction that's basically threatening to implode this team from what I can see. And I really do believe that there will be multiple reasons. I don't think it's random. It's a failure of management. And I think this all started from the death of Dietrich Mateschitz. The moment that man, a great businessman, passed away, a power vacuum opened, and that hasn't really been filled yet. So about that, right? Mateschitz was, in fact, the guardian figure of the team, the founder, the boss of the boss, let's say. He backed both Horner and Marko. Then after his death, there was a control split in the team between, and I apologize to any Thai individuals listening to this. I'm about to butcher this guy's name, but Ciaron Uvidya, who is part of the Uvidya billionaire Thai family that has a 51% share in Red Bull, and Oliver Mintzlaff, who is the Red Bull CEO. He's based in Austria. Mateschitz, to really mediate these parties as he did, basically there's just been a brewing tension. I think the other thing to think about is the power grab that Horner initiated, right? He really tried to become the lead figure and sideline Marko. And he really wanted to do that. And I think that sparked some resentment inside of the team, especially from people who were loyal to Marko, like Jos Verstappen. So I think the other aspects that I'll quickly touch on are the scandal, as we know. The Horner scandal was a catalyst in many ways for this. Not the cause, but a catalyst. Those allegations against Horner with his leaked messages, misconduct claims, sexual misconduct claims, hate to say it. The fact that there was a leak in itself really exposed, I think, the fact that there was some sabotage going internally in the team. It destroyed Horner's credibility, and it's given Marko's camp a little bit of leverage here. And then you've got other things going on, like Verstappen's influence is so strong now. The car is not that great anymore. As you mentioned, the second driver has been a joke, and effectively speaking, I think Newey's exit has kind of compounded all of that. So I'm happy to go into depth on one of these topics, but I think those are the 7 points that I would look at and say these are the issues, and they all started with Mateschitz passing away.
I perfectly agree. It was the death of the CEO of Red Bull, which just kicked this whole thing off. This power struggle that is destroying the team. Basically, the same thing happened with Ferrari, after the death of Enzo Ferrari, and until Jean Todt finally consolidated his power, Ferrari was a complete mess. Prost was knocked out of the team because of an internal power struggle, and he was also used to kick out Cesare Fiorio out of the team. And it turned out the year after the car sucked from from title contender to tractor, as Prost said. Or did he say camion? It doesn't change the insult.
I can't remember what he said, but I think he said something like it was some kind of the car had serious issues, and I don't know the exact quote.
It was because in one race he had a power steering failure, and that's why he said it handled like a tractor. It wasn't just under normal circumstances he said that.
I thought he said it's like a horrible truck to drive or something like that.
Yeah.
It was a pure insult, and that kicked off the firing, and then they hired, the fun thing at Ferrari, they hired Shana Lacey and Gerhard Berger, and they propped them up as the best possible lineup. And then behind the scenes, they nicknamed them useless and hopeless. So that was
That's Claudio Lombardi's fault. I'm sorry, Ace. Keep going.
That was the atmosphere at the team with no clear power figure, in a full power struggle, and what is happening right now to Red Bull is very much the same, Just for comparison, when Dietrich Mateschitz died, he did not leave unattended one team. He left unattended two teams because there is Racing Bulls. I don't see Racing Bulls struggling, falling back, having undrivable cars. Racing Bulls is perfectly fine because there is no one who would struggle for power at Racing Bull. Instead, at Red Bull, which is the bigger team with the bigger money share, there is this power struggle, and the team is very much struggling. I think it is compounded not only by the power struggle, but by previous issues they were having, with the development of the car. When Newey left in Japan last year, 2024, the race after Japan was Miami, in which Red Bull no longer was the best car on track, and the race after Miami was Imola, when Red Bull brought an upgrade and it failed. Newey saw it coming. That's why he left, in my opinion. The car was not following a good trajectory, and Newey jumped the shit when he could. And now that the car has followed this bad trajectory, the power struggle is just making everything worse. The car has never been worse than now to drive by the second driver. We can go back to 2019 with the struggles for the second driver at Red Bull. But the truth is, Gasly handled the situation very badly. Albon took over and he had, not even 10 races of experience. He needed time. He needed more than 1 year and a half, and he wasn't given more than 1 year and a half. And, he did not have the time to perform, to improve. Perez took over in 2021, and he performed as he was expected to. Even 2022, he performed as he was expected to. But when the car in 2023 started to go this bad trajectory, there was nothing Perez could have done. And now Lawson, Tsunoda, they also can do nothing. They're even worse than Perez.
I think it's in a way greediness from Red Bull, because you've got to think they make these trigger happy decisions on drivers, and it's because I think they are partly greedy and partly chasing that rush that they got when they promoted Verstappen, and it was a bold decision, it was a brave decision, and it paid off. Like we've seen, there is no other team who would fire a driver after 2 races, not in 2025. Like you might have seen that in 1984 by some like Guy Ligier or someone like that. He had his outbursts where he would do stuff like that. But it is just crazy how they've treated certain drivers. Like Albon, don't get me wrong, Albon was not by any means the solution to the Red Bull problem of the second driver that had sort of started to brew. But he most certainly wasn't doing a bad job. Like he'd got more podiums than Gasly. He'd got just in general better results. And although the gaps were pretty similar to what Verstappen was, it was usually about 6/10 in qualifying, usually about 30 seconds in the races. There was still something there with Albon. Like Brazil 2019, he was in genuine contention for the win on merit. And we didn't see that. We've not seen that with any driver really, apart from maybe Perez, you could argue, when the car was much more competitive. We hadn't seen that. And it is, yeah, I think it is partly greed. And we've talked about these drivers, we've talked about the drivers here, but also about the drivers in the junior team, because we've talked about how we've had guys like De Vries come in. De Vries was, I believe, Horner wanted De Vries in the team, and Marko didn't want him in the team. And now we've got a situation where, Horner got De Vries in, he wanted Perez to stay and got Perez that extra 2025 contract, which had to be then rescinded. And now we're at a position where Horner isn't allowed to renew driver contracts because I'm assuming the guys at the top don't trust him.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. And I think the problem is with their driver selection, it seems like it's driven by Marko. So there's this one element where, like you said, it's ridiculous. Some drivers get 12 races like Gasly, some get 2 like Lawson, but the overarching theme is that it's survival of the fittest, and that you're not nurtured in a Red Bull, you're tested under fire, right? And if you don't perform immediately, you're thrown out. We know that. But I also think, like you said, they are addicted to that rush, and there's a mismanagement of expectations. You can't expect a new incumbent to start delivering top 5 results immediately, especially if they're really young and they're really inexperienced. So, I think it's clear at this point, that they also think that this model works because they have Max Verstappen. If there was another driver in that seat that wasn't Max, and if they hadn't had a track record of finding Max and Seb, they wouldn't be this ruthless, because they'd say, look, we need to keep the talent that we get because we don't know if the next option is better. I just think because they have Max, this also exacerbates this. They say, well, we don't need to wait for you. Like, I can just put someone else in, and I know Max will always do well. And I think it's a bit of survivorship bias going on there, because for every Max or Vettel, there are 5 talented drivers whose careers were completely destroyed by this approach. And you touched on this, Nedzo. Like, think about it. Jean-Eric Vergne, career destroyed in F1. Sebastian Buemi, career was destroyed. Alguersuari was obviously destroyed. Kvyat. I think Albon's career was significantly impacted. Gasly's career significantly impacted. And you can even argue Ricciardo in the junior team was a victim of this kind of approach. So you got all of that combined with some politics as well, because it's a mess. Like, you touched on it, Nedzo. Like, Lawson was demoted after 2 races.
Yes.
I mean, that's ridiculous. Like, what did he do that he deserved 2? Like, did he come in and say something like, which one's brake, which one's throttle? Like, I mean, that would have been concerning. But it's just weird, because I think Tsunoda's Honda connection probably helped him get that seat much quicker than he would have otherwise. And I think the fact that they're balancing multiple junior prospects also means that they're trying to please corporate backers, and at the end of the day, I also think that, like I said, Max being there makes them more ruthless to the second driver, because they know they have Max and they feel like they've been emboldened that their academy has worked. But then the final thing I want to add is I think Max contributes to this in another way, in that I don't think Max wants someone who challenges him. So they're never going to sign somebody like Fernando Alonso, for example, or Charles Leclerc in the other seat. I don't think they would ever do that, because it's a threat to Max's dynasty #1 status. So what I'm trying to say here is that there's multiple things going on, from Marko's approach to Max, giving them that survivorship bias. And then I think the fact that also they don't want to rock the boat with the internal political situation and with Max's preference for being #1. And that's where you get this chaotic struggle that we've been seeing since 2019, where nobody can perform, and or that clearly has a lot of oversteer on entry and demands drivers that can handle that. So it's a lot of things can be done to address this, but I just don't see it happening anytime soon.
I mean, you can try, and we can look back in time, and you mentioned those guys who've had their careers essentially destroyed by Red Bull's meddling. Like, one example for me, which you briefly mentioned him, was Jean-Eric Vergne. He beat Ricciardo in 2012 wholeheartedly, and then in the races he was slightly faster in 2013, and people don't realize that, because you only look at the point standings, which baffles me, because point standings almost never tell the full story. And you see, as I said, you saw him in 2013. He was better than Ricciardo. Ricciardo got the promotion to Red Bull, and then in 2014, Verne absolutely stomped on Kvyat, and then still didn't get the promotion to Red Bull. And now I've heard people say that internally there were thoughts that Verne wasn't as mentally tough to handle a top team, which considering that he had the results to prove that he was a good driver, maybe does make sense. But as you said, there have been many decisions which, seemingly on the surface of it, baffle why was this driver promoted, why was this driver not kept on. And one of them we can attribute to that is 2019, the thing that kicked off this entire second driver, not scandal, but the problem that they had with it. So when Ricciardo left, they brought in Gasly. Now, obviously, Gasly come off the back of a fantastic 2018. He had every right to that Red Bull seat. Like in a perfect world where the Red Bull is an easily to drive car and Verstappen isn't a dominant teammate, Gasly was the perfect choice. And when he got dropped, people were saying, was it fair? Problem is, he got dropped, and they replaced him with Albon. And a lot of people, including myself and a lot of people, said that he should have been replaced by Kvyat, because Kvyat, more experienced, he knows how Red Bull works. Obviously, at the time, because they didn't know how much of a problem the second seat was going to become in the future, they were thinking, young driver, we'll see how he does. And he's another young driver, and maybe it's just Gasly's fault. But looking back, they should have gone and said, actually, Kvyat's got more experience. Yeah, I don't think the situation with Max and Kvyat's personal lives had fully developed at this point. But yeah, I think that Kvyat should have got on that seat in 2019, and maybe not only could his career have continued past 2020 because it came to a dead end in 2020 off the back end of not a horrendous season, I believe that he could have maybe stemmed the flow for what was yet to come. Maybe we wouldn't have seen Albon make that disappearance from Red Bull and have to basically take refuge at Williams. We wouldn't have had to see other drivers further down the line, Red Bull make the decisions they had to make in the future, because Kvyat brought that experience. Like even against Ricciardo in 2015, there's arguments to be made, but he was better than Ricciardo in 2015. So, and prime Ricciardo, as much as we like to rib on him for being a bit average or mediocre in later years, he wasn't horrendous at his peak. So, what do you think, Ace?
I think that back in 2012 and 2013, even 2011, when he debuted, I was a fan of Ricciardo. Okay, you know, that kind of fan that you have the main driver you like, you follow him, and then you have to follow someone else because it gets boring after a while, and so you choose another driver to follow. And for me, the other driver was Daniel, and so I kept track of his performance through the races in those years when he was at Toro Rosso. I even have the magazines that had the information. You know, what I saw was a driver that improved constantly, did very well, and was also very unlucky. You know, I remember many races where, you know, he completed a race and, you know, not impressive. 3 days later, I got the magazine, and the magazine said, yes, Daniel Ricciardo drove the entire race with this issue, or he had this problem at the pit stop, or, you know, they screwed up his strategy. And so from all of that, following Ricciardo, how he compared with Vergne, I do remember thinking that Vergne was slightly better in 2012, but I also remember in 2014 being happy because Ricciardo had made a bigger step of improvement than Vergne. I remember that at some point, halfway through the year, basically it was certain that, not certain, but there was doubt that Webber was not going to continue, that it was going to be his final year. And so there was this vote by the general public on this website called Formula Passion. You know, they did this vote. Who do you think is going to be the Red Bull driver in 2014? Options, Mark Webber, and I think it was 48%. Ricciardo, which won with 50%, and then there was Vergne, 2% of votes. So I don't think I was alone in that period thinking Ricciardo was the better driver in that moment. Then absolutely seeing what Vergne achieved later in his career, Vergne absolutely was a deserving Formula 1 driver, and it was a shame he didn't get a chance at another team. So that is true. Red Bull is absolutely brutal with its driver management, but up until 2018, it was successful. Okay, how they treated Vernier, how they treated Buemi and Albersauri, how they treated Kvyat. At the end, the results spoke for themselves. Now the results speak for themselves in the opposite way. So a big question is what's the difference? What happened before 2018 that this ruthless management of the driver academy paid off, and now this same ruthless management is just making things worse? What changed? I don't have an answer, by the way.
I think
It's an
the
open
answer is
question.
clear. Answer is clear to me. The only reason that they were able to do that and get away with it was Adrian Newey and the amazing cars that they had, or competitive cars. Now they have a car that is anywhere from second best to fourth best in any given weekend, and they have lost that aura in a dominant team. They really have, and you can't, you know, they've never adjusted the car philosophy to suit a broader range of drivers. They build it around Max because he's won titles. He's the phenom talent that came in and won a race in his first race with Red Bull. But the trade-off is that the second seat has become a death trap, and you can't rely on that driver to bring in any points. So if you have a super dominant car, like in 2023, you can get away with that. That if you are one of 3 or 4 teams fighting for second, and you need every point to make sure you finish second in the constructors, not fourth or fifth. And now it's also being compounded with the political struggles that we touched on earlier, and the fact that there's a lack of stability in the team at a management level, now coupled with an underperforming car and a continued underperformance in the second seat. It's a disaster, and something needs to change. Because you can't just bank on your car being a rocket ship and Max winning everything every year. It's not sustainable. And so, yeah, I do think there needs to be a fundamental change in management style, corporate alignment, and there needs to be an effort to make this car a little bit more suited to the second driver, because, they won't achieve anything this way going forwards. It's only sustainable to me if your car is dominant. And then you can count on Max to win both titles for you. Yes, he's that good. You can't count on him to carry you when your car is fourth best. You need the other driver to be contributing. That's how I look at it.
This is the problem you have when you're in this situation for Red Bull, because we saw what happened in 2024 when they did somewhat dial the car back in terms of its handling characteristics in 2024 when they wanted to go for the constructors title with Perez. We saw that in Baku, and I believe we saw it in a couple of other races in that sort of period of the season where they dialed the car back, and Perez outqualified Max in Baku. He was on course to beat him on merit, to completely beat him on merit, and then he got involved in an accident, which I believe wasn't his fault. We can argue about that till the donkeys come home, to be honest. But regardless, I think we can all agree that. Well, I think Ace touched on it and said that in 2021 and 22, Perez performed as he should have, and that he performed as he was expected. And I think we can all agree that he was the best driver of the bunch, of Gasly, of Albon, of Lawson, of Yuki. And it does kind of beg the question, because obviously towards the end of 24, everyone was saying, "Oh, this guy needs to go. He is the worst driver on the grid. How is he doing this in this car?" Obviously, we knew the car was bad. We knew the car was bad when you're a second driver, but we didn't know just how bad it was. And a lot of fans, and to be honest, I jumped on that train too, that were like, it can't get any worse than this. Like, Perez was going out in Q1, he was going out in Q2, he was finishing outside the points in several races, and we were like, this can't get any worse. And I don't think we realised that when Lawson came along, and when Yuki came along, when they came along, it got worse. It got worse than it was before. You had drivers, instead of going out in Q1, they were qualifying last, and they were qualifying in 19th. So it does beg the question: what should Perez have been kept on for 2025 if they knew how bad this car was going to be, and if they knew that yes, it's bad, but we can't just keep throwing shit at a wall until it sticks?
Yeah, Ace, did you want to address that first, or I can go?
Just quickly, all I was gonna say is if they knew how bad things would have been with Lawson and Tsunoda, yes, I believe they would have kept Perez because Perez has performed better even when things got really bad last year than what Lawson and Tsunoda are doing right now. So if they knew how bad things really were, they would have kept Perez. The point is they didn't really understand how bad the situation was at the second seat. You know, that the car was just Max can drive it and no one else. They didn't understand it, I believe.
So basically, I would agree with all of that. I think the problem here is that at the end of the day, Red Bull have always valued youth and aggression over experience. So I think they were thinking that, well, Perez is doing a substandard job, can't get any worse. He's also getting older. He was like 33, 34. You know, everything looks to be in favor of a younger driver if we put him in. And they underestimated the challenge of coming in against Max. They underestimated how inexperienced their young drivers were. I think they overestimated Liam Lawson, right? Liam Lawson is a very talented driver, but he's still growing, right? He's got a lot of rough edges still, and he clearly didn't leave a very good impression. So, and then Tsunoda has the corporate backing, which makes it tricky because you know that people want him in that seat for corporate reasons, Honda, Japan. But if I were to think about that, I actually think it was a mistake because I don't think Tsunoda offers a whole lot over Perez in performance. We can debate that, but I don't think Tsunoda is a clear upgrade in any way other than, and I don't even think on a sponsorship level. I mean, Perez has a reach that I think surpasses Tsunoda. I mean, Perez is the North American, Latino, Hispanic driver. That's just unbelievable marketing right there. And I want to just wrap this up by saying that if Red Bull had a time machine, I have a feeling they would not, and they could go back in it. They do a lot of things. Let's say they could only go back a year or so. I don't think they would have dropped Perez either. I think it was a mistake, but they're too proud to admit that, I think, publicly.
Just wanted to add when you talk about Lawson, I believe he's through. Okay, you know, incredible talent. You're right. He would deserve a seat, but now that he did those 2 races at Red Bull, and now he went back to the sister team, and he's not even performing at the level of Hadjar. I think his career is over right there. You know, no one is gonna give him a seat, and before that he was performing at the level he was expected to. So it was the switch to Red Bull that just destroyed his career. I don't believe he's gonna recover. You know, there is rumors right now that Red Bull is looking for the extension for the how do you call super license for Arvin Lindblad, and they would need the exemption because Lindblad is still 17 years old, and you cannot get the super license unless you are an adult or you have an exemption.
I was literally just about to talk about that. I believe they have been granted it. I'm not exactly sure if the reports I saw said rumors or it's been granted. I believe it might have been granted because, again, they brought this basically in as a Kimi Antonelli clause. They said if your driver is clearly a prodigy, they will be given a super license at 17. And I can see why they do it. I mean, Lawson at the moment, I think he's getting better. At Racing Balls or whatever, at Racing Balls, he's definitely getting better, but it's definitely not enough at the moment because the driver in the other seat, Hadjar, doing a fantastic job. And this brings up another point. And I think Nico Rosberg has talked about this. Several people have talked about this. Getting the promotion to Red Bull in 2025 is now a downgrade because what are you going to prove? Unless you go out there and match Max Verstappen or get anywhere near him, which is not going to happen because no driver's ever done it before. Unless you go out and do that, you're wasting your time and you're just pottering around at the back in 15th or 16th, battling with the Saubers and the Aston Martin. Like, well done. There's your wooden spoon and there's your medal made out of rice and chicken. Like, as I said, if Hadjar was to get that promotion, to the main team, like some people are predicting by the end of the season, which I don't think would happen because I think they're going to let Tsunoda see out the season. If they do let Hadjar go to that top seat, he might just say no. He might just say no. I want to stay here, and then what do they do? Because I think that's genuinely where we're at with this team. Because you've got to be smart about your career, and I get that Red Bull pretty much control these drivers, but we're at that position now where Hadjar could genuinely just say no without other drivers come in and do awfully. Like there was even I know it was brief talk and it never eventually ended up materializing. For my opinion, the right circumstances that Ricciardo was considered for that Red Bull seat just because he'd been in that team before. And I mean, so some people said that might work, but Ricciardo just wasn't the same driver in 2024 as he was in even as late as 2020. And yeah, whoever you put in that seat is going to do a bad job. So why kill a driver like Hadjar's confidence, a driver like Lindblad's confidence? Because I know he's only in F2, but he's in a very good streak of form, I believe, right now. Why would you kill their confidence, just like you have with Tsunoda, just like you did with Lawson, just so you can get proof that all junior drivers will finish outside the points in a car that is designed for the lead driver? Like, well done. You've proved the point that everyone's known for the last 5 years.
What if Hadjar gets told, you have to go to the 2025 seats, but I guarantee you, we will also give you the 2026 seat. Because 2026, they completely different rule set, engines, chassis. If Red Bull goes back to how it was in 2022, not even performance level, but just both drivers can drive the car, that's a completely different ballpark. If I were Hadjar and I were told you have to go to the main team earlier than usual, but you get guaranteed the seat for next year, I would say yes. Because even though I may do 5-10 races, absolutely that destroy my confidence, then I go back to a possibly winning car alongside a driver with a car I can reasonably use to beat him, to compare fairly at least. If I were Hadjar and I were offered these conditions, I would accept.
But then again, if you're Hadjar, I don't think you have the leverage to be able to tell Red Bull what to do. That's the only problem I have with that, because they could just turn around and say, "No, you're our junior driver. Shut up. You do as I say."
Okay, but different point. If the Red Bull gets tired of Tsunoda very late in the season, and they really want to give the seat to another driver, much like Briatore did last year with his second driver. Duan went into the seat at the last race. If something similar happens, they aren't just going to tell Hadjar, okay, you have to drive for these 1-2 races, and then who knows? They probably are going to tell him, you do these 1-2 races, we don't expect much. Next year, you can deliver to your own level.
If I were Hadjar, I would accept it with certain caveats, and the first being guarantees about updates coming at a reasonable time to Max Verstappen, guarantees about the best engineers, some of the best engineers being on my side of the garage, and guarantees that the car development is going to be addressed, right? The setup of the car is going to be addressed. And that's where I think it's tough to say, but if I were Hadjar, I would say, like, look, we know how your car handles, and I want the car to be tailored in this direction. And I would have those ironclad put out in a contract. Otherwise, if Marko's just verbally promising things, that's not credible. He's just going to go out against his word and kick you out the moment you underperform. So I would go, if I were Hadjar, to answer both your questions, but I would go with some serious guarantees written in contract only.
In the case of those guarantees, how would Max react? If Max gets told you have to be cooperative with his new teammate and you don't get all possible from us, how would Max react? Because right now, I believe Max is staying at Red Bull and may choose to remain at Red Bull for next year, just because Red Bull is at Max's feet, okay? Everything is around Max, the car, the team. So why would Max leave for a different team where he's not gonna get the same treatment? At this point, if Red Bull has to give those guarantees to Hadjar, at this point, Max Verstappen might rethink how Red Bull is treating him and might decide to switch teams. And I don't think Red Bull is willing to risk this.
The thing is with this whole Max, and I get what you're saying, where Max could easily just veto it all. But I think that Max is the kind of driver where if he doesn't see a driver as a threat, he would be less likely to do that. Like, I know Schumacher had clauses in his contract that guys like Barrichello and guys like Irvine and guys like, I don't think Massa was less so, but guys like that had to be the number 2 and under all circumstances. But I believe that Max, don't get me wrong, Hadjar is in the form of his life, and maybe not the form of his career because it's the first year of his career, but even in a great form, and he's considered the best rookie by most people, and he's considered even top 5 drivers on the grid by some people. Even in that current form, we know he's not on the same level as Max. So I think that Max, knowing that Hadjar isn't really a threat to him beating him week in, week out, would allow these. As long as it doesn't affect him, as long as they're not directing resources away from him. I know, like, an engineer or two might be slightly detrimental. The car development being actually drivable for a second driver might be slightly detrimental in a new regulation set. Less so than it is now. But I don't believe Max would foresee it as a massive threat. And even if it was, again, this is the thing. Max, I disagree with Ace in the fact that he is currently, like, Red Bull will give him anything he wants. Yes, they will give him anything he wants. But I believe that Max could go to any team he wants and propose and say, "You give me this contract," and it's like, let's say it was like the most money, the most amount of demands, and he could go to any team with that contract. I think on the grid, bar Ferrari, and he'd get what he wants. He could go to Mercedes and get what he wants. He could go to Williams and get what he wants. He could go to Aston Martin and get what he wants with any of the current driver lineups, apart from Ferrari, because they have a sticky situation with Leclerc and Hamilton. I mean, they'd obviously been off Hamilton rather than Leclerc, but still, I think Il Predestinato, or whatever it's called, and all that sort of stuff would make it so that Ferrari is just a political mess anyway. But it does beg the question of if Max will go to Aston at some point. It's been rumoured for multiple times. There's even been rumours about him going to Mercedes at times. And, I mean, it just depends on, is he going to be a dick like Schumacher, where he wants everything in his way, regardless of whether it's going to make any big difference to a teammate? Or is he going to be more permeable in a way, kind of like Hamilton was? Like, don't get me wrong, Hamilton did have stinky teammates like Bottas, but he also had teammates like Rosberg, like Button. When he could have easily, I think he could have, maybe not a McLaren, but a Mercedes, he could have easily said, especially in 2021, he could have easily said, "I don't want Russell in my team. Give me Bottas for another season." He could have easily said that, but he allowed it to happen. And I wonder if Max is going to be more down Lewis's route in terms of accepting the challenge from teammates. But I think the difference between Max and Lewis is Max wouldn't get beat by the teammates.
I would believe that, okay, Mercedes would try to give everything possible to Max, and Max could go to Mercedes. If he does, as George's teammate, George is gonna burn the team down in trying to fight Verstappen. Okay, we all three know that George and Max don't get along well. You know, even at the end of last year, George made those comments about Max. And so if they were teammates, George would never allow the team to give Max everything possible at his own expenses. I would say the same for Aston Martin if he were teammates with Alonso. Not because Alonso wouldn't be, but I have doubts, not because Alonso wouldn't be able to do that, but because Max and Alonso are quite friends. So maybe they'll respect each other and it doesn't come to that. And even then, Alonso's only a year. George, it's not guaranteed 1 year only.
Or 2007 McLaren situation.
I mean, you bring up really good points because it's a cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth it to keep Max, or can you afford to lose him to another team, which could be Aston, it could be Mercedes? You know Toto Wolff would snap up Max Verstappen. For sure he would. So would Lawrence Stroll. I mean, the one thing here is, what can Red Bull get in exchange for that? So what I'm saying is, let's say Max hypothetically goes to Mercedes. Would George Russell come over to Red Bull? And could Red Bull then sign another star next to George Russell and then have two, if Max Verstappen is the best, and have two of the best in a Red Bull car to compensate for that? It depends, like, what the dynamics are, but I think it's really hard go against Max. I agree with that, and I think that's part of the problem here.
I talk about the linearity of some of the options here because you said if Max went to Mercedes, would George go straight back to Red Bull? I don't think he would. I think that George. Well, first of all, I think he would try and go up against Max. But if, for example, Mercedes picked Antonelli over George, I don't think they would. I think they'd demote maybe Antonelli to one of the Mercedes supplier teams, like a Williams, like they did with George at the start of his career or something. I know it'd be a backtrack for him, but it'd be a couple of years, and the Mercedes work seat was just because everything fell into place anyway, and I don't think Kimi would mind too much. But with George going to, I don't think George going to Red Bull would be possible. It's because you think about the other teams. Like there are a lot of other top teams that are open. I mean, Lewis is going to leave Ferrari in at least 1 or 2 years. McLaren, like don't get me wrong, Lando and Oscar, they say they're locked in place, but if Lando keeps performing as he is, I think that he's not locked in place, and I think they do. I think McLaren, what they do need is a driver that is going to deliver 9 times out of 10. And currently, what we've got with Oscar and Lando is a driver or 2 drivers that deliver 7 out of 10 and 6 out of 10. And I think they'd be finally wanting someone like George, who isn't the best driver on the grid, but he's a 9 out of 10 in all circumstances. And I think that's what they need. So I think that George wouldn't go to Red Bull. I think that if Max was to leave, they'd promote from within, because. Don't get me wrong, the current crop of drivers they have at Red Bull, aside from Max, isn't the best. You've got Tsunoda, Lawson, Lindblad, and that's about it, really. There's not really any major prospects coming in for F2 that have any F1 prospects anyway. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Lawson and Tsunoda, the ones with experience, that's not a horrendous lineup, especially in a car that's quite neutral and wouldn't be geared towards Max's strengths. That wouldn't be too bad a lineup. Tsunoda, I think, would lead in that regard. And I've just realised I've forgotten Hadjar. So I'll probably put Hadjar in there instead of Tsunoda. But again, that's just the same lineup we have at RB. And if they were to have a car that has neutral handling characteristics, it'd just be the same as what it is in RB, except instead of fighting for 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, they'll be fighting for 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. So I don't really see any problems with maybe Max. Yes, Max leaving, they will not be winning championships straight away. And if they have a championship winning car, Hadjar might lose it to a guy like Russell or Verstappen in another team, ironically. But they wouldn't be like, let's say, having 2009 Sebastian Bourdais and 2008 David Coulthard in the same team. It wouldn't be like that level of Red Bull struggling, or Robert Dornbos like they had in 2005. It wouldn't be that bad, is what I'm trying to get at. So yes, losing a driver like Verstappen would be a massive wreck for the team and may possibly even cause even more internal struggles. But it wouldn't be the end of the world in terms of they could recover. Like Mercedes have recovered and arguably gotten better because they lost Lewis. So it could happen for Max as well.
But Nedzo, that's very interesting. But what I would say to that is a few things. So first, linearity, interesting, right? So I think that, let's say that did happen. Who's to say that, first of all, George Russell's comfortable being teammates with Max after the tension between them? It's serious. These two clearly do not like each other, right? In a generation where everyone makes an effort to smile for the cameras, to do selfies, in the Gen Z millennial generation, for you to have an old school 90s, 80s feud means you really don't like the other person, right? We know that. It's just not acceptable in society to even be like that generally. And the fact that it's pushed to that extent, I like it. It's entertaining, but it tells you there is a real tension there. So I don't know if it's guaranteed that even if George wants to, that he would. And the other thing I would point to, Nedzo, there is, who says that Toto Wolff wouldn't replace George and keep Kimi Antonelli? I mean, that's the other issue, is if Max is going to Mercedes, I don't even think George's seat is safe, because Toto Wolff, after the whole Rosberg-Hamilton saga, is very risk-averse. He's very risk-averse. He didn't want to bring Alonso, from what I understood, because of that. Didn't want to hire some other drivers, and he went with the safest possible option, Valtteri Bottas. Like, wow. What a boring choice that was. And I actually think if it's Mercedes that court Max, I think George will be heading to Red Bull. Just because of what I said. I don't even think that Toto would allow those two to be in the same team. after the mess that's happened, as we've all touched on. Your point, though, linearity is highly logical. So if that did happen, I think that would make Red Bull's situation tougher. Because I really don't think Hadjar, Lawson, Hadjar, whoever, Sonoda, Lindblad, that is not a lineup that you walk into a sponsor meeting or a corporate meeting and you show and you're like, yeah, they've got Leclerc and Russell and Verstappen and the other teams, but we have Sonoda, we have Hadjar, and that's why you should come with it. People are just going to say, well, no, I'm going to go with Mercedes or Ferrari or McLaren or another team. So yet to see. I mean, Hadjar is phenomenal. I agree with you on that. I just think that if it is Mercedes, I think Red Bull have a chance of getting George Russell, and that could actually be worth it if they can then put someone like Hadjar and Russell in the same team with a good car that suits both. Guys, that's better than Verstappen and someone else in a car that isn't. Like, to me, a performing Russell and Hadjar is a stronger lineup than a performing Max and anyone else next to him in the same team in the current layout. But I'll stop there. What do you guys think about that?
We pretty much covered everything. What I thought when you said, guys, we have Tsunoda and Lawson, I thought Aston Martin, how they would do this scene. We have Fernando Alonso, 43 years old, and Lance Stroll. That's why you should come to us. And the point is, they are coming to Aston Martin. So maybe
hold on. I can't believe that you're making me. Hold on, I gotta interrupt you there. You're making me defend. You're making me defend my the driver that drove me nuts.
You don't have to.
I can't believe this, man. That's so. I mean, look, when you walk into a boardroom, right, and you're presenting and you show Fernando's achievements, that's impressive. Like, people are going to say, because you guys both know this, that having a world champion is a marketing boom. It's just like when you show that on your website, it's like, wow, we are in a team with a world champion. It doesn't matter what even the results were. It's like you have a 2-time Formula One world champion. And Fernando is marketable. Lance Stroll is not. So that's yeah. So I actually think it's much worse than that, because when you go in and you're like, yeah, we got Isaac Hadjar, who's quick, but it's his second season, he's achieved nothing, and some other guy that's been around and done nothing, like Sonoda or whoever. It's completely different than this is 2-time world champion Fernando Alonso, who's still really good, and yeah, the boss's son. Sorry about that. So it's just different. I'm just going to throw another curveball to this discussion. If I were Red Bull, I would want to get to the bottom of this car. I would hire somebody like Alonso, see exactly, is it possible to even adapt to this philosophy? Because if anyone can do it, I'm sure Alonso could adapt to it. But back to your point, Ace, I'll stop here. I don't think that Alonso Stroll is as bad as... And I like Hadjar a lot. He's really talented, but it's not as unappealing as Hadjar, Lawson, Hadjar, Sonoda, Hadjar, another like Red Bull Junior. I think Alonso carries that a lot more.
Marketing, yes, I think Alonso does a perfectly fine job. But I just thought anyone with a brain that doesn't just look at marketing, look at actually we want to achieve something, and has to look, one is the boss's son, and the other is 43 years old. Is he gonna turn 44 in less than 2 months? I would have doubt. I would have, if I were Aston Martin and I found someone giving me this doubt, I would have to explain point by point why Alonso is still performing at an extremely high level and why you don't have to worry about his age. But it's not like if I put there Verstappen, I don't have to explain anything. If I put there Leclerc, if I put there even Hamilton, even if I put there Russell, if I put there Norris and Piastri, I don't have to explain why my driver is both marketable and capable of winning. With Alonso, I think at this point it is a fair question to put in doubt how well he's doing. I perfectly believe he's doing the best he's ever done. Maybe raw speed is not up there how it was once, but his character, he's behaving far better than he ever behaved at Ferrari or McLaren. It's never thrown either Alpine or Aston Martin under the bus yet. Racecraft, I think, is a step forward from 2003, 2018 period. Okay, he was one of the best drivers wheel to wheel, but now, since 2021, I think he made a step forward on that very high level of form. So, but you have to explain this, okay? If someone comes up to you and wants to actually win and not just marketing, you have to show all these things and convince him. With Max Verstappen, with Russell, with Leclerc, you don't have to do that.
I'm just going to sit there for 10 seconds. I'll hand it over to you, Nedzo. I think that's true, and I think that's why there's such strong rumors linking Aston Martin to Max. I think they know that they need a younger superstar that's proven to carry this team to achieve Lawrence Stroll's so-called dream of winning a title. I just don't think the way they've gone about it has been the smartest, and we'll see how that situation develops. But I acknowledge your point. I think Aston have already thought about that. I think that's why they want Max as well. So yeah.
I think we've covered all our bases there with our kind of mini preview of the 2026 driver market and who could go where, how everything would work, and let me think of something else we can go to.
Nedzo, how about this?
Yes.
Do we think the Red Bull parent company should be focusing resources on developing the junior team? Or do you think that, now is a good time with everything going on that they should just consolidate Red Bull, sell the junior team, and really just, streamline corporate management in the team post Mateschitz? Do you think this team is stretched too thin right now? And, I think what I'm trying to also say here, it's just, if you do that, do you think then maybe Hadjar and guys like that would then be more likely to even come to Red Bull? I mean, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
If I take it first, okay, thank you. So I think I have the answer to everything. Right now, I don't know from a economic point of view how things stand. I don't know if the main company is making a profit or not from Racing Bulls. I think, aside from that it is just a full benefit to have a second team. You can use this second team to cultivate talent. You can use this second team to also pull talent, engineering, and recruit people from outside of England. You have the main team in England with all the post structure you may wish to have. You also have a smaller team that can pull all the talent possible from Italy, away from Ferrari. And if you find someone good, you just tell them, okay, come to the main team and come to England. They don't want to move. Okay, there is a second structure still belonging to Racing Bulls in England. You start to interact with the second structure. You have the second team Racing Bulls that starts to develop this way of working, very much decentralized. Okay, you have those working at Faenza, you have those working in England, you have those working from home, from track. You have these 4 different bases, and you have a team you can use to experiment and develop a way of working, very decentralized, and how to make it as efficient as possible. And anything you learn from this smaller team, that is effective, you can apply to the main team. And the main team is centralized at Milton Keynes, but nevertheless, they have a team that is a track away from Milton Keynes. So you still have 2 centers of engineering. You have to make collaborate with each other real time. So even if Milton Keynes will remain centralized, anything you learn about effective smart working, you can apply to the main team. It is just too much of an opportunity, Racing Bulls, that I don't think, unless it loses a lot of money, why would Red Bull main company drop the team? If they get an offer of $2 billion to sell the team, maybe.
I've got to say, I'm with Ace on this one. I believe that, we saw what happened with ProDrive and McLaren in 2008. I think the FIA realized that allowing Red Bull to have this junior team meant that no one else could have one. And as I said, if they'd have allowed McLaren to have ProDrive, we would have then had it would have been 11 teams on the grid, and 2 of them are junior teams. That's 1/5 of the entire field are essentially just byproducts of another team. And that would have essentially just made it a joke because then Ferrari would have wanted one, and then Renault would have wanted one, and then everyone, and then you eventually get to a point where you have maybe 13 teams on the grid, and a quarter of them are junior teams. So I think that having a junior team in the modern landscape, because they wouldn't allow, the FI would not allow any other team to do it. I don't think they'd allow Mercedes to buy it. I don't think they'd allow Ferrari to buy it. They wouldn't allow anyone. They'd say it has to be a completely new entity, a completely separate thing from Red Bull. So I believe that we talked about marketing earlier. Talk about unique selling points. That's Red Bull's or Red Bull or Racing Bull's unique selling point. That is what they bring to the table. They can say we are the only legal thing of our nature in the entire sport. And I'm with Ace, unless there's some sort of significant financial sort of prerogative or thing that they get from selling this team to whether it be, I think there were rumors in 2023, Hugo Boss, Apple. Unless some big corporation like that comes along and says, we want it, they're not going to sell up. Because, as I said, forever and a day, there will be more Red Bull coming through the pipeline, even if it is stinky ones, Pepe Marti. Who else? I mean, Jack Crawford was in there. He's not anymore. Ollie Goethe. For every stinky Red Bull Junior that does half well in Formula 2, one of them is going to eventually end up being good, and one of them is eventually going to end up being a race winner, and one of them is eventually going to end up being a world champion. And to miss out on the opportunity to evaluate drivers, to evaluate an extra 2 drivers for your buck, you get to evaluate 4 drivers a season, and to evaluate 2 drivers in that junior team against each other. That is an unpriceable resource, especially where the way Formula 2 is going nowadays. We're at the point where you can't accurately judge a driver's talent based on Formula 2 results because of everything that's going on in that series. So why would you sell a legitimate opportunity to measure drivers against each other? To as I said, with all the engineering stuff, you can easily procure engineers and try some tricks that way. I don't see why they'd sell that, and I think it'd be a massive disappointment if they did. And especially when the Red Bull, the Racing Bulls team is doing well in itself, it could easily help out the main team. It just can. We're at a point where we have had a couple of times this season, I believe, Racing Bulls drivers having to get out of the way of the Red Bull drivers after the first pit stops or during the first pit stop phases because they're so close. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing that they're in that situation because they have good cars. It would be funny if it was like the customer cars days where especially back in the 2023 era, if you'd just had a Red Bull 1-2 and then an RB 3-4. It would have been funny, but it wouldn't have been nice for everyone else.
Yeah, Ace, go ahead if you wanted to add to that, but I have a lot to say.
Nedzo covered everything. I forgot the entire part about the drivers. He's perfectly right. If they don't have a junior team, they don't get to promote and fire and demote all they want like they did in the last 16 years.
Yes.
Sure. This is what's interesting to me. It ties back to what we were saying earlier on about the corporate power struggle at Red Bull. And this is why I think it could still happen, even though the points you laid out, Nedzo, were very logical. I think you're right about F2. I think Ace has kind of confirmed that too. It's hard to compare, right? These young guys in F2 and to compare the results with the way that's everything that's happening in that series. And, why not have your own personal training ground? But I would say a few things. First, remember the power struggle that we touched on earlier in the episode is basically Oliver Mintzlaff, who's the corporate side of the business based in Austria. He's trying to streamline this company. I think he wants Marko out of the company. From what I understand, they've clashed. Mintzlaff has even demanded that he co-signs every driver contract, so that's actually reduced Marko's influence. And Mintzlaff, I think, aligned with the Thai billionaire side of the family, is, gaining a lot of ground in the team. And, what that means is that I think that in many ways, it could make sense for Mintzlaff, especially since he's becoming the boss, right? Like we really don't talk about this guy enough. Like I always hear about people talking about Horner and Marko and other people in the team. I'm like, okay, but what about Oliver Mintzlaff? He's the boss, okay? Like he is the new Mateschitz in many ways, right? So from his perspective, first of all, he's a corporate guy, so he looks at not Alpha Tire, RB, and says, "This is a commercial failure." Like from a strict ROI perspective, it's a financial strain. It's a financial drain with little return. It was created in a completely different era. It was almost like when Mateschitz did this, it was like a passion, and he just trusted his friend Helmut Marko. Now it's run like a corporate asset. There's cost caps, there's board accountability, there's shareholder scrutiny. I don't think Mintzlaff is a racer, and I don't think he really cares about emotionally investing in the junior team's legacy. And then the other 3 points are that like Marko's influence is fading. So with Marko sidelined and basically other drivers start leaving, like Verstappen, I think ultimately they have alternate paths to recruit drivers, right? And finally speaking, I think the last 2 points that I make about this is like the cost cap era, right? I think that puts a strain on the parent company because from what I understand, Red Bull does help out with the junior team with a lot of things financially. I also think owning 2 teams probably brings less of a technical advantage under a cost cap era than it used to, right? And we've also seen, the final point I'll make is that there are buyers, right? Andretti, the Asian investors, High Tech. These are all teams that want to break into the grid, and Mintzlaff might say, actually, I want to sell it to these guys. And if there's a bid that's in the hundreds of millions, that's an amazing investment. So it's really tough. I think the strongest argument is that it's a pipeline and a training ground, and it helps the Red Bull team decide who to promote. But if they're all performing so poorly recently, and it's a strain on the team financially, it's no longer strategically essential. It's not profitable. It was Marko's project, and Mintzlaff doesn't have a passion for it. I could see it getting sold. And I could see Mintzlaff just really turning this team into a traditional corporate-run entity. And so that just plays into the power struggle that we mentioned. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I think it's actually more likely than we think, perhaps.
What hit me more of your points was the first one, when you said, if Oliver Mintzlaff, I just butchered his name anyway, if Oliver doesn't have the racing mentality and just looks at the team from a marketing point of view, you're perfectly right. You know what it reminds me of? Laurent Rossi, Alpine, 2021. He made a mess of the team, because he wasn't a racing personality. He was just a random high figure in the team that was put ahead of a Formula One team and made a mess of it, because you don't run the team like you run anything else. If that is the case, if you have another Laurent Rossi at Red Bull, then yes, I do believe they can take all these choices. I also believe they're the wrong ones. I still believe that the correct choice is to keep the sister team and pay for both teams. Then I can see that you may get an high-profile figure just looking at it from a marketing point of view, and you're perfectly right. All your points make sense. It could be possible.
Right. We've talked about the Red Bull powers. We've talked about Mintzlaff. We've talked about Marko. We briefly mentioned him at the start, and we might have briefly mentioned him in this segment. We talked about Christian Horner. And this circles back to something that has been on in the news in the past couple of weeks, the past couple of, or just in general. And apparently, Christian Horner has been approached by another team that is very well ran and has no issues whatsoever, Alpine. So, obviously, Alpine itself has been in the news with the whole Oliver Oakes situation, and everything that's been going on with his alleged ties to Russia and all that rubbish with high tech and all that sort of stuff. So could we potentially see? So we've had rumors of Max leaving. Could we potentially see Horner leaving? And what would that do to the team? What would that do to the landscape of F1? I mean, there's even rumors he's going to go to. Like, if that team isn't already politically messed up as it is, why would you bring him there? That kind of stuff.
I mean, Alpine is new. I heard some days ago they were talking about this other team. It was Ferrari, as far as I heard. And then both parties denied it. So, and then later on came out the rumor that they limited Horner's powers inside the team. So, yeah, complete mess, the situation around Horner. Even before that, there was the sexual harassment allegations. So, I really don't know how to frame Horner's situation. I think it's a complete mess. They're just I don't know enough behind the scene to make a complete scene, even make a guess of what could go behind the scene. But it does not look like Horner is there to stay. Not after Dietrich died.
You say you don't know how to frame Horner's situation. I think Horner frames himself as much as it is, so I don't think he needs anyone to do anything for the framing for him.
Yeah. I think, I mean, really, look, the whole Horner Marko autonomy structure has been completely broken, and it does look like, at first it looked like it was Marko who was under pressure, didn't it? For a few months there, it looked like Marko was being forced out, and now it's kind of swayed back where it looks like Horner is on his way out, coupled with those rumors of Ferrari wanting to sign him and other teams as well. So, yeah, I think Horner has put himself in a tough position. It's still unclear to me what's going to happen there. If I were Red Bull, I would probably keep Horner over Marko, because Marko is not going to be there for forever. He's much older than Horner, and I think Horner is more compatible with the direction Mintzlaff wants to go in, which is a corporate, traditional run team. He is not a like Mateschitz, Wild West. My friend runs this unorthodox style of manager, right? This is a true corporate executive. So I'm Mintzlaff. I think Horner fits that much better, but we'll see what happens. Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't think it'll change much anyways. I think the real issue here with Red Bull is they need to get their power struggle sorted somehow. And then they need to start really focusing on making a car that is competitive, but also complementary to more than just one driver in order to maximize points. But yeah, we'll see how that goes.
I think the problem with what Red Bull has nowadays is, you mentioned it, is the fact that Marko is, I think he's older than 70 years old. I think he's pushing 80. That's the problem they have, because I think if Horner and Marko were both 30-year-old men who had the rest of their lives to push into F1, even 50-year-old men, even if they're both the same age as what Horner is now, Marko's the better option. He's a lot. Don't get me wrong, Marko's controversial, and Marko says things in the media that he shouldn't say, but he doesn't have the same allegations that Horner does. And to be honest, I think he knows a lot more about F1 than Horner does. Because yes, Horner ran ART, and he has had success, and he was a driver, and that's a much less successful driver than Helmut Marko ever was. He does have, I suppose, some experience, but I believe that Marko, like the driver program at Red Bull, don't get me wrong, it's come under criticism and it's come under problems, but it's not been fundamentally like useless, and it's not been fundamentally wrong, and it's not, as I said, like you look at like, even these drivers, like yes, they've not performed in Red Bull, your Lawsons, your Hadjars, your Tsunodas, but they're all good drivers. They're all very good drivers. And his side of the operation, yes, I know he doesn't just do driver development, but his main focus has been perfect pretty much since 2000 and whenever it started, 2004, 2005. Or actually, no, I think it started as early as 2002 with Enrique Benoldi and people like that. But ever since then, it's pretty much, with a couple of exceptions, like maybe you could argue Buemi and Alguersuari were a bit weak, or Verne and stuff weren't up to the task. It's been fantastic. Whereas Horner, now that Adrian Newey's gone, now that his magnum opus, the thing that's pulled him along this entire time is gone, he's useless. He is complete, in my opinion, in my opinion, he is completely and utterly worthless. And he adds nothing, in my opinion. He is just a figurehead. He is just like, I wouldn't say he's like what Toto Wolff is, because Toto Wolff is a great businessman. But he's essentially Toto Wolff without any of the business credentials. He's just a talking head who says stuff for the team and goes over the radio to Max at the end of a race and says, "You did a great job, mate." That's all he is to me. As I said, for me, Newey was the entire mastermind behind the Red Bull success. As soon as he got there, and as soon as he got the car geared up at the start of 2009, the team went flying. And I mean, I know Ace has talked about how Newey jumped because he saw the writing on the wall, but I sort of also believe that he was both the cause and the effect. Newey was demoralized. We saw this. Like Newey's admitted in recent years that his investment in Formula One and his drive to produce Formula One cars reduced around the start of the turbo hybrid era because the designs became restrictive and he didn't like it. And what happened to Red Bull's cars as soon as the turbo hybrid era started? They fell off a cliff, and they went second quickest, then they went third quickest, then they went fourth quickest. And then at the start of the wide body era, he said, "Okay, I like these. I'm going to design cars like." And what happened as soon as he came back? Red Bull started getting progressively better until they won a championship.
I have a lot to say on that.
Do you want to go ahead?
Ace, you were holding out your hand.
You can go. No, you can go ahead, but just one name I think we should not forget. Rob Marshall. Go on.
Rob Marshall is the man right now. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri better be marking his birthday on their calendars and sending more than a $30 gift card, yeah? But anyways, so what I was going to say is this. That's really interesting, Nedzo. I personally think because Mercedes had such a head start that the engine component was insurmountable.
Yes.
And we all know this, right? I'm saying things that we all know here. I'm just trying to say that I actually think Red Bull had the best chassis even in those years. They had the best chassis. We know that. It was just that the engine advantage was so much that it didn't matter if Newey built the best car. They couldn't overcome that. And I think Newey became more interested when the rules changed because it reset things, right? It gave him a chance to actually win and really, extract the most out of his car. So I totally agree with you. It was Newey. And I've said this for years that, like, you can talk about Marko, you can talk about whoever you want. If Helmut Marko was never there and Adrian Newey had gone to Red Bull instead without Marko, let's say, in a timeline, they still would have won titles with the cars they had. It's not like Vettel was the only person that could have won a title in that Red Bull. Vettel, amazing driver. I'm not putting him down, but Mark Webber could have won a title in 2010 if there was a compliant number 2 to Mark. There's no doubt about that. Yep. Webber would have won races. Like, if there was a useless number 2 driver next to Mark in 2010, yeah. Webber would have won that title, right? The races that Vettel won would have gone to Mark, where he came second, and Mark would have won it. And let's say you put a Lewis Hamilton or Fernando Alonso or even a Kimi Räikkönen in the car in 11, or maybe he'll get some poles, that's for sure. I don't know if he'd finish, but yeah, we'll talk about that another day. But I respect Pastor, but I think if you put one of the top 3 drivers aside from Vettel in the car in those years, we know they would have won the title. And why? Because of the Newey and Rob Marshall, as Ace alluded to, the Newey and Rob Marshall designs, mostly Newey in those years, I would say. And that's just a fact. So yeah, you're totally right. And I think that's why Newey's departure is even more devastating. I think it's already started to unravel at Red Bull. And they don't have that. Pierre Wache is very talented, and he was brilliant when he was at Michelin. But so far he hasn't proven that he's even comparable to Newey in any way, is he?
That's a hard task to live up to. It's like saying you're not as good a boxer as Muhammad Ali, or you're not as good a sprinter as Usain Bolt.
But is he even as good as James Allison? Is he even as good as Rob Marshall? Is he even as good as any of these? Simona Resta? Yeah. I don't even think he's on their level, mate. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like, is Pierre... Here's another question for you.
Yes.
Is Pierre Wache top tier?
I don't know. I'm going to be frank, because you talked about his Michelin. I don't even... So, I think I'll leave the knowledge of technical directors or whatever big corporate titles they have to you, because I just simply don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know something about something I don't know.
I mean, he was an engineer who was in charge for the interaction between the tires and track conditions at Michelin during the tire war. He did a really good job. I mean, apart from Indy 05, he did apart from Indianapolis, he did a really good job. And I remember his name even back then just being mentioned here and there. It's like, oh yeah, Pierre Wache. So now he's designing Red Bull cars. That's great, but I don't know. I haven't seen the same confidence around his designs. He's obviously very good, but I just think it supports your point, Nedzo, that Newey leaving has already had a negative effect on the team. I think they've lost confidence on the technical side, and we'll see if they lose more. If Max thinks, no, I don't think we can win with this group of technical people, he'll leave. So it's to sum it up, I agree. Newey has always been the most important part of that team, and now that he's left, there's a hole there. There's a hole there, no doubt about it.
So yeah, I mean we've got Horner. I think it could happen because at this point, I think, especially if Horner leaves, I think that team's pretty much in the waste bucket. I know he doesn't have much of an influence, and I think Max leaving would be more of a detriment. But then again, at the same time, you could also argue what other team principals are there that are sitting on the sidelines? Because in the past we have had big figures sat on the sidelines because they lost their jobs or whatever. What are you going to do? Bring Cyril Abiteboul back? Bring Gunther Steiner, of all people, back from... You're not going to do that. So I think Red Bull are stuck with Horner at the moment, unless they promote someone internally, like some other teams. Ayu Komatsu has done a fantastic job. James Vowles kind of did a sidestep from Mercedes power team to Mercedes power team. Has done a fantastic job. Maybe something like that could happen. But unless they do something like that, Red Bull are stuck with what they've got at the moment. And if Verstappen leaves, I think it's possibly time for an entire change. That's what Enzo Ferrari used to do in the years of the 70s and in the years of the 70s where they started doing really badly. I think it was the end of 1973. He just decided, right, completely new driver lineup, completely new everything, and we're gonna go from there. And then they started winning again. So maybe that's what Red Bull needs.
So, Ciaron, you asked if Pierre Wache was elite level. I think he is, because just look at the situation. Just look at the situation of Red Bull. They lost Rob Marshall in 2023. Then they lost Adrian Newey. The CEO died and an internal power struggle started. Meanwhile, the development of the car was already going bad and it was getting very hard to drive by the second driver. Look at the situation right now. Still, they don't have those two figures. There is still a power struggle. But at least in the hands of Verstappen, the Red Bull can be the second best car and can still win races. Okay? Red Bull took a wrong turn. It's not performing as the best of the rest. They've been overtaken by McLaren. Ferrari, who do they have of engineers? They have Loic Serra, they have some great names. They had Enrico Cardila. Mercedes, who do they have as great names? They had the same great names they had when they were winning everything some years ago. Okay, they did not do better than what Pierre Wache is doing right now in a worse environment. Okay, Red Bull still understands the ground effect cars better than either Mercedes or Ferrari. The only team that is better is McLaren. And in my opinion, it is because, aside from all the new infrastructure, which Red Bull does not have access to, it's because they got Rob Marshall away from Red Bull. I think that is the real blow. That is why, aside from the bad development trajectory, Red Bull is no longer the best car. It's simply because Rob Marshall went to McLaren. But otherwise, Pierre Wache still understands these cars better than either Ferrari or Mercedes. So, yes, I do think he's elite level. I believe at some point the Red Bull team will have to be rebuilt. That is a longer discussion. I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
It's a really good point. I agree with that too. I agree with it. I think that people didn't really understand how important Rob Marshall was until he left and then did what he did at McLaren. So he's probably thrilled with the move because he's just become a superstar. Everybody knows who he is now. He's no longer one of Newey's guys, working in the background. Now he's a big name. He's made it publicly. So you can't keep a dream team like that together forever. And basically, I'm still not sold on Red Bull's new structure. It just seems like they're going backwards. They're not going forwards at all. Mercedes seem to have at least stabilized. Red Bull seem to just be slipping back and back. And they also have the driver issue. The team principal issue is not resolved. I mean, there's so many things at Red Bull that are still in turmoil, in flux. And team principals, there's so many options as well, right? I mean, who would even replace Horner, Nedzo, you think? If let's say Horner gets sacked tomorrow, hypothetically, okay? Who would replace him?
That's the thing.
Who are you really going to bring back?
Yeah, you'd have to have an interim. Well, obviously, you'd have to have an interim in with find someone, unless they already had someone lined up. But I think you'd have to promote internally because, as I said, you're not going to bring someone like a Beta Bulling. You're not going to bring someone like Steiner in because they're just either not good or they were last good or helpful so far along that it doesn't matter. Or you're going to bring in, as I said, that your only option is to promote from internally. And I don't know about the structure of these teams. I know about the guy at the top, and I know names like Pierre Wache, and I know those guys. But it seems there is no one there who is able to. Do you want Pierre Wache to become the team principal? Do you want someone else? Who are you thinking of, Ciaron?
I got a name for you.
Okay. Oh God.
Sebastian Vettel.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, he's a good racing driver, and racing drivers have proven to be great team principals. I'm trying to think of examples now I've said that, and I can't think of any. Racing drivers, I mean, Bruce McLaren, Jack Brabham.
Those was a terrible team principal. We know.
Because Prost was a terrible team principal because he wanted, because he tried like micromanaging the drivers, and he tried telling them, this is how you should corner, this is how you should do this. And the driver's like, I can't do that because I'm not you. Because Prost was one of the greats, and he was saying that stuff like to like Olivier Panis, Shinji Nakano, Yana. It's not going to work, mate. They're not on your level. And just in general, like obviously we can go on. He inherited that 1997 Ligier, what was going to be the 1997 Ligier, and then everything from that point onwards was just a.
There was a lot going on in Prost's defense, like you said. There was a lot going on with the politics, the government funding.
In Vettel's credit, I think Vettel would be a lot more humble and have a lot more humility than Prost would. Because I think Prost, although he was a fantastic driver and not as much of a villain as media paints him to be, he was a bit of an arrogant git at times. I don't think that Vettel would be like that. I think that Vettel would be like his bee-loving, tree-hugging self, where he would be, hello, guys, like the McLaren corporate ethos, essentially. Just be like, hey, we're all friends here. We're all here to do a great job. I don't think he'd be ruthless. But I don't see, because he doesn't have any engineering. For me, a team principal is someone who has their fingers in all pies. They have the drivers' minds in one side. You have the engineering department in another side. You have the corporate side in one side. Vettel knows how to do corporate. He knows how to talk his way for a press conference. He knows what it's like to be a racing driver, but he has no sort of engineering qualification. So when Pierre Wache says, "What direction should we?" You're the final decision in what happens with this car. Do we go down this path of development? Let's say it's straight line speed or aerodynamics. What do we go with? He's been like, I haven't got a fucking clue. Help! He's experienced that as a driver, and he might think, oh well, personally, I enjoyed lots of rear downforce, but he isn't going to be able to lead those team decisions, and that's where you'd need, I think, two figures, and then you just go back to the same problem you had with Horner and Marko. So, unless you have a cohesive unit working together, Vettel would not work as a team principal, and I think you would just have to. I've said this about 1,000 times, but you'd have to promote from internally.
Yeah, that's a fascinating take. Ace, what do you think of that? You've been silent for a while. What do you think?
I would only add that if Vettel were to be chosen as team principal of Red Bull, he would be a great help for this second driver issue. You know, Vettel would be able to tell the team, look, you have to focus also on the second driver, and you have certain stuff to make him more comfortable. Otherwise, this isn't gonna work. You know, Vettel would be ideal in doing that. I don't know how good he would be at handling everything else, but for sure he would be the best at handling the current issue of the second driver.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I also think Seb might. I don't see Seb as Michael Schumacher. He's not that organized, in my opinion, like with his thoughts, with everything. So I just don't see him as a good corporate type, you know? Like, you have to be a corporate type. You can't just be somebody who's like a famous name, because I don't think Seb enjoys that kind of environment to the same extent that we think he does. But with all his like bee and environmental friendly stuff. He seems like a little bit of a free spirit these days. Whatever happens, we've seen in the past that basically it's hit and miss with drivers as team principals, right? Like Prost and Lauda did not do a great job. Fittipaldi's team, average. Sergi's team, average. Brabham, different era, but it did okay. Bruce McLaren, when he was boss, did okay. Arturo Mazzario did poorly. Eddie Jordan was not an F1 driver, but he drove before. He did well. So there's no clear trend other than, you need a strong technical team in any event. So I don't know. It could work if you bring Seb. I think it would be a popular move, but I tend to think that Mintzlaff and it will lean towards what Nedzo said. It would probably be an internal promotion if I had to put money on it.
Actually, going back to Seb, I thought of a better idea. So Niki Lauda had a certain role at Mercedes. Prost had a certain role as advisor, consultant at Renault before he got kicked out by Laurent Rossi. Schumacher had a certain role for Ferrari in those 3 years he did not race. Vettel would be, I think, very good for Red Bull, but honestly, he could do it for Ferrari too.
Yeah.
Also in this role of advisor, it would be all of the benefits and not the drawbacks of him not being able to run the team. The same role that Alonso is going to cover at Aston Martin after he retires if things don't change.
Alonso having a role.
I don't have much else to say on that. I think it's we've covered a lot there. So on the team principal front, anyways. So yeah, we'll see how that pans out. The only thing I will say is like if he was in that special advisor role, it would groom him nicely for the team principal role eventually, because he'd learn without having responsibility. At the same time, he'd have responsibility, but the buck wouldn't stop with him. He'd be able to say, well, he'll be able to learn from whoever's team principal and say, oh, that's what I should do, that's what I shouldn't do. So when the time comes, he could be promoted. But to be put straight into a team principal job, yeah, you're right. I'm not sure about that.
I think Vettel has performed miracles at some point in his career, but I think that now wouldn't be the time to come and do it again. I mean, yeah, we've talked about Vettel. We've talked second drivers. We've talked about everything that you could possibly want when you're discussing the absolute downfall of Red Bull that's happened since. Some people think it's the start of 2024. Some people think it's well before that. But I think that we've covered it all. So you can possibly leave your opinions in the comments below. Because you've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and X at the DRS Train podcast. And thank you all for watching. Stay safe and goodbye.